My time.
The time belongs.
I think it's very interesting.
My time.
I think it's very interesting. The president said they indicted him twice.
Mr. Chairman, please stop the clock and restore his time.
The gentleman from New York. We will give you a few more seconds. We will do that. But when you ask a question,
answer, Chairman,
my time.
because it's honest. So he asked a you don't tell me.
Yeah, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
You're a lawyer, not even a lawyer. Shut up. The president saying they indicted me twice. They sure did. They tried to impeach him twice, and you...
I'm going to show you two photos.
Thank you.
I'm going to show you two photos of former Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew attended Congress past. You were allowed to redact photos to protect the victims of Epstein's sex trafficking operation. Former Prince, here's the video.
This is so ridiculous, and that they are trying to deflect from all the great things.
Welcome back. What you are about to hear is not a dramatization. It is not a political thriller or a fictional screenplay. What happened in that hearing room was real, it was raw, and it was one of the most combustible moments in recent congressional history. Today, we are breaking down every layer of what took place when Attorney General Pam Bondi sat before the House Judiciary Committee and faced a barrage of questions about Jeffrey Epstein, the Department of Justice, and allegations that reach all the way to the highest levels of the United States government. Buckle up, because this one goes deep. Let us start with the context, because without context, you cannot fully appreciate the weight of what unfolded in that room. Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted sex trafficker who died in federal custody in 2019 under circumstances that remain deeply disputed, ran what prosecutors and investigators have described as a decades-long international sex trafficking operation. The victims numbered in the hundreds. Some estimates suggest more than 1,000 women and girls were abused, trafficked, and exploited through Epstein's network. His associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted in 2021 for her role in grooming and trafficking those victims. But here is the thing that has haunted this case for years, and that haunted that hearing room with particular intensity. Epstein did not operate alone. He had a network. He had clients. He had co-conspirators. And for years, advocates, survivors, and members of Congress have demanded to know who those people are and why none of them have ever been held accountable. That is the backdrop against which Pam Bondi took her seat before the committee. And from the very first exchange, it was clear this was not going to be a polite conversation. The hearing opened with an immediate confrontation. Democratic members wasted no time. The very first substantive question cut straight to the heart of the matter. How many of Epstein's co-conspirators had the Department of Justice indicted? How many perpetrators was the DOJ even investigating? It was a simple question, a direct question, the kind of question that in a normal oversight hearing would receive a direct answer. Instead, what followed was a pattern that would repeat itself throughout the entire hearing. A pattern that infuriated Democrats, energized Republicans on the other side, and left the American public watching at home with a very unsettling picture of how the nation's top law enforcement officer handles congressional oversight. Bondi refused to answer the question the way it was asked. She wanted to answer it her way, on her terms, at her pace. And when members attempted to reclaim their time, as is their right under congressional procedure, Bondi kept talking. She interrupted. She asked her own questions back at the members. She brought up unrelated topics. She referenced a man named Chase Mulligan in what appeared to be an attempt to redirect the conversation toward a local criminal case in a Democratic members' district, an attempt that backfired spectacularly when the member pointed out that Bondi clearly did not know the details of that case. The chaos in that room, the interruptions, the gaveling for order, the shouting between members was not incidental. It was the direct result of an attorney general who appeared, by the accounts of multiple members, to have no intention of giving straight answers. Now let us talk about the specific allegations that were leveled in that hearing, because they are serious, they are detailed, and they deserve to be understood clearly. The first major allegation concerned the Epstein files themselves. Congress passed legislation ordering the release of documents related to Epstein's operation. The law was explicit. The names and identifying information of victims were to be protected. The names of abusers, enablers, and co-conspirators were to be disclosed. According to multiple Democratic members, the Department of Justice under Bondi did precisely the opposite. When the files were released, the names, phone numbers, addresses, and personally identifying information of victims were published for the world to see. Women who had never come forward publicly, women who had kept their trauma private, sometimes even from their own families, suddenly found their names and contact details exposed in documents that were made publicly available. At the same time, the members alleged the names of the powerful men who had patronized Epstein's operation were redacted and protected. The law said protect the victims and expose the perpetrators. According to the Democrats in that room, Bondi's DOJ did the exact reverse. Think about what that means for a moment. These are women who survived sexual abuse and trafficking. Many of them had chosen for deeply personal reasons not to go public with what happened to them. That was their right. That was their choice. And according to the members of Congress sitting in that hearing room, the United States Department of Justice stripped them of that choice while simultaneously ensuring that the men who abused them remained anonymous and protected. One member highlighted this with particular force by displaying photographs of Prince Andrew attending parties with Epstein. The member pointed out that under the Federal Victims Trafficking Protection Act, anyone who patronized Epstein's sex trafficking operation is also guilty of a federal crime. Not just Epstein, not just Maxwell. Every person who used that network, every person who abused those girls, all of them potentially criminally liable under federal law. The member asked Bondi directly, "Why did you close the investigation into uncharged third parties last July?" A Department of Justice memo from July 2025 stated, according to the member's account, that the DOJ did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. The member argued that the photographs alone, sitting right there on the table in front of the Attorney General, constituted more than enough evidence to open an investigation. Bondi's response did not address the substance of the question. She deflected. She pivoted. She brought up Merrick Garland, her Democratic predecessor, and the failures of previous administrations. It was a rhetorical maneuver that the member saw through immediately and called out loudly. This brings us to the second major category of allegations, and this is where the hearing became truly explosive. Multiple members raised the names of specific individuals currently serving in senior positions within the Trump administration who, they claimed, have documented ties to Jeffrey Epstein that are spelled out directly in the Epstein files. The names raised were Howard Lutnick, the Secretary of Commerce, John Phelan, the Secretary of the Navy, and Stephen Feinberg, the Deputy Secretary of Defense. All three were described as having clear and confirmed ties to Jeffrey Epstein according to the documents. One member stated that Lutnick traveled to Epstein's Island in 2012, years after Epstein had already been convicted of a sex offense in 2008. The member asked a series of direct yes or no questions. Has the Department of Justice asked Secretary Lutnick about his ties to Epstein? Has the DOJ spoken with Secretary Phelan? Has the DOJ interviewed Deputy Secretary Feinberg about what is written in those files about him? Bondi's answers were revealing, not for what they said, but for what they did not say. For Lutnick, she responded that he had addressed his ties himself, meaning publicly, without DOJ involvement. For Phelan, she said she did not know. For Feinberg, she did not give a clear answer at all. What emerged from those non-answers was, according to the members, a stunning admission. The Department of Justice had not conducted serious interviews with these senior administration officials about their documented connections to a convicted sex trafficker. Prominent men across the world had resigned in disgrace after being named in the Epstein files. In the United States, men with those same connections were being appointed to run the Department of Commerce and the Department of the Navy. One member made a pointed observation that captured the absurdity of the moment. When asked whether President Trump was aware of Secretary Lutnick's ties to Epstein when he appointed him, Bondi did not answer. The member concluded aloud on the record that the president did in fact know, Because Lutnick was reportedly his next-door neighbor, the relationship was not distant or casual. These were people in close proximity to one another, and yet the Department of Justice, the member argued, had done nothing to investigate those ties. The third major area of attack concerned the allegation that the DOJ under Bondi had been weaponized against the president's political opponents. This was not a new accusation in American political life, but the specificity and the detail with which it was laid out in that hearing was striking. Members listed case after case after case. James Comey, the former FBI director, investigated. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who had successfully sued Trump, investigated. Lisa Cook, a Federal Reserve governor, targeted. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, allegedly threatened. Members of Congress, including Adam Schiff, Mark Kelly, Alyssa Slotkin, Chrissy Houlihan, Jason Crow, Chris Duzio, and Maggie Goodlander, all reportedly the subjects of DOJ attention. Journalists Don Lemon and Georgia Fort arrested. Homes of journalists raided. Students threatened with prosecution for protesting. The members drew a direct and damning contrast. On one side, you have an attorney general who has not indicted a single one of Epstein's co-conspirators, who has not held a single one of the powerful men who patronized Epstein's operation accountable, who has closed investigations and protected names and released victim information. On the other side, you have an attorney general whose department has arrested journalists, pursued elected officials, and attempted to indict sitting members of Congress on charges of seditious conspiracy simply for reminding military service members that they have a constitutional duty to refuse illegal orders. That indictment attempt was rejected by a grand jury. In fact, multiple grand juries had by that point rejected multiple DOJ indictments, including 2 separate grand juries in Virginia that voted down indictments against Letitia James in a single week. The members argued that the pattern was unmistakable. Prosecute the president's enemies, protect the president's friends and associates. One of the most detailed and devastating speeches of the entire hearing came from a Democratic member who methodically laid out what he called the facts regarding Donald Trump's own presence in the Epstein files. He was careful to say he was not accusing the president of being a pedophile, but he detailed that Trump is described as one of the most frequently named individuals in the Epstein documents, with more than 38,000 references to Trump, his wife, or Mar-a-Lago appearing across at least 5,000 files. He described a file indicating that Ghislaine Maxwell had presented a young girl to Trump, who spent more than 20 minutes apparently in conversation with her. He described FBI investigator notes suggesting that Epstein transported a victim to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump, during which Epstein allegedly bragged to Trump about the girl. The member emphasized that what made all of this so alarming was not just the content of the files themselves, but the fact that the administration responsible for releasing and investigating those files is the same administration whose officials and associates are named throughout them. The conflict of interest, he argued, was not subtle. It was structural. Another member raised a particularly disturbing detail involving a witness who had reportedly called the FBI's National Threat Operations Center with information about Trump and Epstein. According to the member, this witness had driven Trump in a limousine and had overheard a conversation between Trump and Epstein that left him so disturbed he reportedly nearly stopped the vehicle. The witness also described having met a girl who said she had been raped by both Trump and Epstein. The member stated that this girl later died, and that officers at the scene said the manner of death did not appear consistent with suicide. The member then made a direct accusation. The Department of Justice had never interviewed this witness, not under the previous administration, not under this one. No one. The member demanded that Bondi interview this witness immediately. Bondi did not respond to the substance of the accusation. Instead, she attempted to speak over the member and was gavelled down. What made the hearing additionally extraordinary was the presence in that room of the survivors themselves. A Democratic member took a portion of his time not to ask questions of Bondi, but to introduce the women sitting behind her. He named them one by one: Teresa Helm, Jess Michaels, Laura Bloom McGee, Danny Bensky, Liz Stein, Marina Lacera, Skye, Amanda Roberts, representing the family of the late Virginia Giuffre, Charlene Richard, and Lisa Phillips. These were not abstractions. These were not political props. These were real women who had survived real crimes, who had traveled to Washington to sit in that room and demand accountability, and who had been waiting for over a year for the Attorney General of the United States to simply agree to meet with them. That meeting had still not happened. That request, according to multiple members, had been made repeatedly and repeatedly ignored. The member speaking in their presence was direct about what he believed this represented. He said that Bondi was running, in his words, a massive Epstein cover-up right out of the Department of Justice. He noted that Congress had subpoenaed 6 million documents, photographs, and videos from the Epstein files, and that the DOJ had produced only 3 million, claiming the other half was duplicative. He challenged that justification by noting that a DOJ prosecution memo from 2019 had reportedly been taken down from public access, which he argued undermined the claim that the withheld material was all redundant. He also raised the treatment of Ghislaine Maxwell, who was moved from a higher security facility to a minimum security camp in Texas, where she reportedly received what he described as 5-star treatment, including catered meals, private gym access, and a therapy dog. This occurred after Trump's Deputy Chief of Staff, Todd Blanche, according to the member, spent 9 hours interviewing Maxwell and satisfied himself that she had nothing further to say about Donald Trump. The implication was clear. Maxwell's improved conditions were not about rehabilitation or cooperation. They were about ensuring she stayed quiet about the president. Republicans in the hearing pushed back hard on all of this. They argued that Democrats had never asked these questions of Merrick Garland during the Biden administration. They defended Trump as the most transparent president in history, pointing to the signing of legislation to release the Epstein documents. They invoked the stock market, the Dow, the S&P 500, and the state of American retirement accounts as evidence that the Trump administration was succeeding where it mattered. And they attacked Democratic members personally, accusing them of Trump derangement syndrome, of grandstanding, of asking 4-minute questions designed to prevent answers rather than elicit them. One Republican member, rather than questioning Bondi at all, turned to ask a Democratic colleague a series of simple moral questions. Is raping children wrong? Is killing random citizens wrong? Is enriching yourself as a sitting president wrong? All of which the colleague answered yes to, while the Republican implied that these were questions Bondi could never have answered honestly. It was a chaotic, almost theatrical moment that captured the complete breakdown of any shared procedural norms in that room. But here is what cut through all of the noise. The ranking member's closing statement, delivered with the measured fury of someone who had been watching this institution erode in real time. He spoke about the quality of justice in America depending on the character of its government. He named the lawyers who had resigned rather than follow Bondi's orders. Danielle Sassoon, who had been Bondi's own pick for acting U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, a Federalist Society member who had clerked for Justice Scalia, who resigned rather than execute what she considered a corrupt order to quash an indictment against Mayor Eric Adams as a political favor for the president. Her deputy, Hagen Scotton, an Iraq War veteran and 2-time Bronze Star recipient who had clerked for Chief Justice Roberts and then for Judge Kavanaugh, who resigned with a letter stating that he expected the department would eventually find someone foolish enough or cowardly enough to follow the order, but that it would never be him. And Eric Siebert, a 15-year career prosecutor who had been nominated as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, who spent 5 months investigating Letitia James and James Comey, found no evidence to support charges and was subsequently pushed out, replaced by Trump's personal lawyer from the Mar-a-Lago documents case, a woman with 0 prosecutorial experience whose subsequent indictments were thrown out entirely by a federal judge who found the appointment itself to be blatantly unlawful. The picture that emerges from all of this is not a subtle one. What Democrats described in that hearing room was a Department of Justice that has been fundamentally reoriented, not toward justice, not toward the protection of victims, not toward holding powerful criminals accountable, but toward the protection of a specific set of powerful people and the punishment of their political opponents. The Epstein case, with its hundreds of survivors still waiting for accountability, with its files naming powerful men whose lives have continued undisturbed, with its lead prosecutor fired and its investigations closed, became in that hearing room the symbol of everything that critics of this administration say has gone wrong at the Department of Justice. Whether you believe the Democrats' characterization entirely, partially, or not at all likely depends on where you stand politically. But what is harder to dismiss is the behavior of the witness herself, an attorney general who refuses to answer yes or no questions, who responds to inquiries about specific investigative steps by pointing to what her predecessor did not do, who attempts to ask questions of the members who are questioning her, who brings up the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the middle of a hearing about child sex trafficking, who has still not met with the survivors of Epstein's abuse despite over a year in office and repeated requests. Whatever one thinks of the politics surrounding this hearing, that behavior is difficult to explain as anything other than an effort to avoid accountability. The survivors in that room had waited years. Some of them had waited decades. They did not come to Washington for theater. They came because they want answers. They want to know why the men who abused them are still walking free. They want to know why their names were published while the names of their abusers were hidden. They want to know who made those decisions and why. And they want someone in a position of power to sit across from them and explain it. That conversation, as of the day of this hearing, still has not happened. The Attorney General of the United States has still not met with them. And the Department of Justice, if the allegations raised in that hearing are accurate, has not just failed them. It has actively moved in the opposite direction from justice. That is where we are. That is what happened in that room. And the question now, as it has always been in this case, is whether anyone in power is going to do anything about it.